the first one, just to give Kathy a break. I've had a question. I'm going to ask Kathy to comment on it after me. That says, how do investors think about commodities in the context of their recent strong performance? I guess maybe they're saying sort of, are investors, are we too late to be involved in commodity markets? So I'll start and then I'll hand it over to Kathy for her views. My comment would be that over very long periods of time, as you would have seen in the presentation, that there is a long-standing benefit of holding commodities in a portfolio. We can't know how commodities will perform going forward, but Kathy's given us a really good run through of some of the themes that are involved, that are running behind the commodity markets today. So while, as I said, we can't know what's going to happen to markets going forward, we can certainly look at history to show that having that small allocation has been beneficial during periods certainly of high inflation, and also that diversification benefit, and that there are key themes for commodities today. Now, whether they are across the board or whether they need to be sort of, are there winners and losers, as Kathy talked about, that may be the case. So the way investors look to invest in commodities is really important. And I would say the other comment to make is that it sometimes can be difficult to get all of the benefit of commodities in a portfolio once the market has started to move. Historically, or not historically, but as a rule, commodities are not anticipatory assets. They reflect performance and underlying supply and demand today. So that contemporaneous relationship means that investors really need to think about holding at least a small allocation to commodities all of the time. Now, that has been a relatively difficult proposition when you look back, over a 15-year period, say prior to the pandemic, but the recent performance has made up for that. So, Kathy, what would you add to that?
Well, I have a hard time with the concept of a super cycle, right? We've seen super cycles in the past, but I get that question every single day. Like, are we in a super cycle? And we we might be in this super cycle, but I'm concerned about saying that outright, that it's a super cycle that's going to last for 10 years. Are commodities fundamentally tight in that we we have more demand than we have supply? Yes, I feel very comfortable with that. But, could things happen like the China lockdowns? China's the biggest buyer of commodities. The lockdowns have been really corrective to the downside for commodities since I think since mid-June we started coming off, right? So a lot of the questions I get is this a dip? Like, can we buy this and then hold it for the next few years? And we feel like, yes, this is the dip. We've had a correction over the summer. We just did a piece called Cruel Summer, and I think that it's been very frustrating for commodities, but we're still up year to date. And we think as we head into 2023 that there will be a lot of wonderful opportunities for commodities for a long time, right, for at least a few years. But as I said, I'm concerned saying super cycle, but in terms of tactical timing, like Fiona said, it makes sense to have like this allocation to commodities. I would argue it should be around 5%, right? Or because a little commodities goes a long way. We are very efficient hedges, but again, I don't know that this is going to be a 10-year super cycle with it just a straight line up. We were just going up for all of last year and for the first part of this year mostly, right? But we've been in a correction right now. And I think that now which feels like a dip, and we are expecting to see these commodity markets go higher for the next few years.
Thanks. I've got a question here, Kathy, about gold, which I'm sure is often one that you get as well. How should investors think about gold? Should they think about it separately to a broad commodity exposure? We know the performance of gold has been pretty rubbish over the last 12 months or so, which would surprise some investors because it traditionally was seen as an inflation hedge. So how are you thinking about gold and sort of where it fits in?
And I feel bad because I always bash gold because it doesn't feel like a commodity, right? What are commodities? Are raw materials, right, used in building that are being consumed. But gold, right, it is not really like consumed. I mean, we have jewelry, but gold behaves more like a currency. And that's why the frustration I had when I first joined Invesco and everyone's like, oh, I'm fine for inflation. I've got gold. And I always joke that it's very hard to get gold bugs to part with their gold investment, but it is not an efficient hedge for inflation. The way that the math works out is you would need, I think it's like 35% of your portfolio in gold to hedge your inflation. And last year it didn't work at all, right? Because the 70s were a bit of a different time when gold did work as an inflation hedge. So, but I actually love gold as a safe haven hedge, right? We have a war in Ukraine, right? If you're concerned about geopolitical risk, it makes sense to hold gold. But as an inflation hedge, it doesn't work. And as a commodity, like I said, it's not truly a raw material. So I feel bad that I bash gold all the time, but, you know, invest in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating to me that the performance has been so poor, given that, you know, traditionally we have seen it as an inflation hedge. And, you know, I've read and heard and thought about this a lot. And, you know, I think there are a number of potential reasons for that. I think, you know, arguably the cryptocurrency markets have had some impact there in terms of that asset of last resort or sort of safe haven asset. I think the nature of inflation is different this time. And I think investors have a wider variety of alternatives when it comes to, you know, holding inflation sensitive assets. So,
right. And also, you know, the interest rate effect, right? So that's, you know, the interest rates rise, you know, is impactful, you know, to the negative correlation to gold, right? So interest rates go up, gold goes down. And I feel like that is what is investors are focused on right now. Globally, many central banks raising rates. They're afraid, and then when they raise them, the gold goes down.
Related to gold, Kathy, how should investors think about commodities in a market that we're in now, where, you know, the US dollar is trading at near all-time highs? Traditionally, again, you know, strong dollar has not been great for commodities. It's a little different this time. Right. Why do you think that is?
I feel like that relationship broke down. So for those who don't know, when commodities are purchased in dollars, so other countries, when they're buying commodities, right, and the dollar is strong, it is very expensive to buy these dollar-based commodities, and that's what we've seen this relationship exist for years. But in this current market rally, that relationship has sort of broken down because, as Fiona, as you mentioned, we have the rising dollar, but also rising commodity prices. So I don't feel that is going to be a concern for the next few years. It may be having an impact right now because the dollar is so strong, but generally we still are bullish commodities even with a strengthening dollar.
Okay, that's great. Maybe got a bit more of a fun final question, which we can both have a go at answering. We've had a question that says, do you have a favourite commodity? So maybe I'll start, and I'm certainly in the first instance going to talk about my favourite commodity, not as an investor, just as a commodity. So I started my career in the livestock markets. So I have a very large fondness for the cattle and the lean hog markets. They're markets that are relatively small and often don't get a lot of airtime, but they're where, as I said, where I started my career in commodities and where my love of commodity markets developed. In terms of from an investment perspective, look, I think there will likely be winners and losers, you know, over the following, taking a very long-term view over the following decades, as we move through, you know, the energy transition. Certainly not saying that the petroleum complex is going away anytime soon, but its importance is likely to wane. And I think, my other area of real interest is these, so-called new commodities, which I really do think will become the driving force of, overarching commodity sort of market performance over time. And that, while traditional commodity markets and our ability to invest in them has taken quite a long time to develop, we think about, the S&P GSCI as an investable index has only been around for 30 years. And even prior to that, many futures, derivatives markets in commodities may have been available to hedgers, but weren't necessarily available to investors. So it's taken a reasonably long time to get to the level of sophistication we have in commodity markets today. But I think that next step is really going to happen very, very quickly. And investors can play a really important role in developing those markets, improving the liquidity in those markets, and really, pushing us towards that goal of being able to, really decarbonise and use alternative energy sources. So, Kathy, what's your favourite commodity?
I love that you went back in history, because for my history, I've always done oil, and I love oil, like both WTI and Brent. And being American, I always root for WTI over Brent. But sorry, Fiona, but I think that having gone to OPEC meetings, knowing some of the OPEC oil ministers personally, it is a passion of mine. And I don't think a day ever goes by where I don't read something about the oil industry. It is truly my passion. But now, being an Invesco and covering all commodities, I have to say I'm starting to love the grains again, because I went on a crop tour recently, and really understanding corn and wheat I loved. But right now, my little pet obsession is for diesel fuel, like heating oil, right? So diesel being used in everything, and I feel like the refiners are not are producing a lot of gasoline at the detriment of diesel, and we're very low. So if someone said to me, what would I buy right now? It would probably be diesel, the symbol HO. But I do believe that as investors, one of the most important things is education. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today. That's why I spent a lot of time on the road educating investors. This is a new asset class for many investors. So educate yourself. And we use commodities in every, all day long, every single day. Like the day in the life is all chock filled with commodities. So I think it's a fun thing to learn about, but also a very important thing for investors to understand, and to really give it that chance to have that 5% allocation over the next few years.
Thanks, Kathy. That's great. Well, I think we'll, in the interest of time, we'll wrap up there. Firstly, Kathy, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you today. Hopefully, the attendees can see how passionate both of us are about the commodity markets, and have been given the opportunity to learn something about a market maybe that they don't know too much about. So with that, Kathy, thank you so much, and I will turn it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Y es así como llegamos al final de las actividades de este día. Pero manténganse conectados. Volvemos mañana.